Fraudulent tax. Oh yeah, people asking for payment. Leave me alone. No, no. I'm trying to hear this. Just go home. Leave me alone, please, God.
What was I gonna do?
Yeah, you were gonna put it on your wrist and hit it instead of biting your nails. Come in the other room. I'm trying to hear this.
I'm not supposed.
Police say anyone who does could pay a big price. Would you hand over your debit card to help solve a problem for a stranger? It's something that Toronto police say happens, and the cardholder ends up losing money. So this preys on our good nature. Police are issuing a warning about a scam involving a fake taxi or rideshare driver.
They're still talking about this.
The two appear to be having a heated argument over payment. The passenger saying they can only pay with cash. The driver is saying he won't accept it because of COVID.
They're relying on someone, some good Samaritan, to come along that wants to solve the problem.
The hope is that the Good Samaritan will opt to pay using their debit card in exchange for the cash. And once that card is handed over, a switch is made.
When you leave with a fake card, they're taking your real card and emptying your account.
Last March, we told you about a number of similar cases like Susan Palmer, who didn't notice the fake card until it was too late.
Within 20 minutes, they had taken $1,000 cash from the ATM, 5,000, a little less than 5,000.
Lena Sheep was given a fake receipt to go along with her fake card. Halton Police issued a similar warning last month, and last year, Hill Police broke up a fraudulent taxi operation they say netted more than $2 million. And they want the public to be aware, when handing over your card, be sure who you're handing it to. They say they don't want to thwart anyone's good nature, but they do want people to be aware when you see this, you see two people arguing in this nature, it could all be a scam. Reporting live on Sean Lee, I'll send it back inside.
Thank you, Sean. During the pandemic, Pearson is already accepting international flights, and soon a number of other Canadian airports will be
Careful, you're gonna have to grind and fuck up.
What have you been playing? No, you shouldn't.
Frank, what's the news? If you want to talk, go somewhere else.
Starting November 30th, flights from abroad will be allowed at 8 additional airports. There are currently 10. The new locations include Johnson Munro, Hamilton International, the region of Waterloo International, and the federal government says higher vaccination levels are allowing it to reopen the airports to foreign flights after an 8-month ban.
When it comes to COVID-19, Public Health Ontario is reporting 331 new cases in its most recent update. 195 of those cases are among people who either aren't fully vaccinated or their vaccination status is unknown. More than 20,000 tests have been processed in the last 24 hours, and the vaccine positivity rate is sitting at 1.5%.
This will be ready earlier, so I'm going to make the meat now and then.
383 more cases
Okay.
are considered resolved, bringing that total to nearly 588,000 over the course of the pandemic. 7 additional deaths are linked to the virus, meaning 9,881 lives have been lost to COVID-19 in Ontario.
Tonight's regional breakdown includes 44 new cases in York region with 42 in the city of Toronto. Peterson has 33 cases with 21 in Hamilton.
I need to activate the screen.
Hi.
Hi there. You'll have to share this. Let me share the screen or activate the screen.
Thank you.
I'm looking for a gift. For a
There we are.
Thank you.
I got visuals on the side.
I may have to go into the other room. I think that's too loud.
Here we go.
Oh, I'll just mute.
Okay.
A call out tonight, Marion, to see if you could get any more volunteers. How many people do you have so far?
I have 3, but my goal is 8.
Yeah, okay. Well, I still think that there's lots of opportunity. I would encourage brand new members, even people who don't have any beekeeping experience. They might be good people to join because there's a lot of research. And so, you know.
Yeah, I've actually got a slide that I'm going to speak to that, Michelle.
Perfect.
So,
Great.
okay.
So that's all organized.
Yeah.
I just got my message from the Southwest Florida beekeepers. Once a month, I get a little, email from them, and they were just showing me the November beekeeper calendar and what's in blossom and things to do around the hive. But it's more like what's in bloom in November,
Exactly. Yeah.
Soon as they can come out and stand morning.
I've got this incredible stormy sky in front of me. It's amazing.
Can you see anything? It's dark already.
It's like still light, except for this
Oh.
like big storm cloud that looks like it's coming. I don't know.
I had those all day long.
Mine were coming and going. I hung out laundry, took it back in, hung it out, took it back in, and then just gave up.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, hi. How are you?
All right. How are you?
Good. All set to go?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm excited about your topic. It's going to be really great. And then I was just seeing that I think we need you back again when you finish your next project.
Yeah. It's I'll be talking a bit about where I'm going with the research in the presentation. But yeah.
Okay, good.
Let's see how this first presentation goes. If you want me back.
Oh, I'm pretty
That's
confident.
another question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see, hopefully more people will trickle in.
Yeah, we usually have 20 to 25. We've been pretty steady at staying at around 20, which is pretty good
Mhm.
considering that's a quarter of our membership.
Yeah.
Fire stick from it froze again, Mom, but my trick didn't work. It froze again. Wait, what?
Just pockets of storms coming through. I hope I'm going to be okay. Do you want to give people a couple more minutes or get going? So you're muted.
Let's give them, at least another 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, we'll let them in as they come in, but this is kind of low for our numbers.
Yeah.
Samuel Ramsey is giving a speech tomorrow on Tropilelaps. I think it's at 7 p.m. Well, it's the Somerset Beekeepers group.
They get some really interesting things going
Yeah,
on.
they have like thousands of members. So,
Oh, do they?
oh yeah, when you watch their meetings, there's pages and pages and pages and pages of people that come on Zoom. Yeah, I think it's like a national kind of. I don't know how big Somerset is, but anyways, it's a very large catchment area. Yeah, I've seen. I saw Professor Stephen Martin, and I'm going to watch him again because he does the presentation on treatment-free beekeeping, and then I bought his book. Well, it's the handbook for the Beekeepers Association, but I think he's on a little bit later in the month. So yeah, so I'll be watching that. But yeah, they have really good speakers, so I'm watching that all the time. But I think Samuel Ramsey's speaking tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, I think I signed up for that.
I mean, he already spoke on Tropilelaps, I think, to our group, didn't he?
No, I think we had him with Varroa.
For sure not.
Yeah.
No, he didn't speak on? Okay, well, I've seen him speak on Tropilelaps. I don't know where. Maybe it was at Apimondia, Alan. Alan, do you remember?
No, I don't remember. But
Okay.
I'm eager to hear that presentation of him.
I hope we treat Tropilelaps like Madagascar and that we don't treat for it so that our bees can just adapt, but I know that'll never happen.
Give him 2 more minutes and then we'll start.
Okay.
What presentation are you talking about with the in the UK right now? Is it connected with the British Beekeepers Association, that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was through Eventbrite. You could sign up,
Yeah.
and it's the Somerset Beekeepers Association.
That's correct. Yeah. If I can figure out the time zones, I watch them all.
I didn't get I signed up for the spring meeting. That was just this past spring.
Yeah, the OBA one had Dr. Stephen Martin speak. Yeah, it's the Somerset Beekeepers Association, and they have awesome speakers, and they do them all. They do them through Eventbrite.
Yeah.
So do we. We have awesome speakers.
Oh, we do too. I was just saying they do it through Eventbrite. That's all.
Yeah.
Considering we're just like a little handful group, I think we actually do really well on our speakers.
Yeah.
I was very impressed by last month. It feels like a week ago. The days just blend together in the coronavirus, especially if you're just like working from home. And they all sort of, it feels like it was last week, but a month has passed. The last month's meeting was very good.
It was good. It was good. We're lucky that people are agreeing to come and speak to us. It's great. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead. Welcome to the UTBA's November meeting. We're going to start with Marion Whittam, oh my goodness, Whittam, talking about the November beekeeping calendar. Go ahead, Marion.
Thanks, Lucy. This is just a very short presentation just to keep everyone on track with respect to what's going on in the bee yard for November. And just 1 second here. I'm just adjusting the slides and there we are. So I've been watching the Facebook pages and it looks like some folks are still having relatively high mite counts after doing the oxalic acid, either vapor or drip or drizzle, as you call it. So I know that's continuing with some folks. But today I just want to say that winter, as we know, is coming. And apparently in the Georgian Bay area and Parry Sound area, there's snow coming today, so it's cold. So it's time to start thinking about installing and securing your winter covers to insulate the hives. But remember to ensure that there's adequate ventilation to prevent moisture to build up, and leave an upper entrance open for exhaust of moisture if possible. Also think about tilting your hive slightly forward a few degrees to allow any accumulated moisture to drain out of the bottom of the entrances. Now your equipment, you should be sure that you are storing your equipment during the winter, but that it's not harboring things like wax moth. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure that you take your frames, if you can, and put them in a freezer for a couple of days, and that will definitely destroy the wax moth larvae. Also, depending on where you are, our hives happen to be in Muskoka, and they consider setting up a windbreak around your hives. And you can see that what we've done is we do have a snow fence, which does help. It's not a perfect windbreak, but it does help. We are in an area where it's impossible to bring things like hay and stuff around. So that's what we've used. And also just a reminder that the Ontario Beekeepers Association is meeting virtually on Friday the 19th for members only, and Saturday, November 20th. The cost of it is $40, and you're going to get some great updates from OMAFRA. That's your the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Foreign Affairs, the OBA, the Ontario Beekeeping Association's Tech Transfer Center, and much, much more. So now we are just going to talk about one of our special projects that, those are my resources. Now, I have a really special project, and our coordinating committee is really excited about it. It's the announcing the new UTBA Beekeeping Calendar. Looking for a very small and agile team of about 8 people to create the first ever UTBA Beekeepers Calendar specific to the Greater Toronto Area. No experience is necessary. You can be a brand new beekeeper. We'd love to have you. The calendar we modeled after the Florida Beekeeper Calendar. This happens to be one for November. And it's very, very nice way to look at things with bees, keep everyone on track. Learn what bees are doing in the hive on a month, each month, about monthly bee yard tasks and flowers used by bees to pollinate. And the goal is to have the calendar ready and posted on our website for the 2022 beekeeping season as a useful tool for beekeepers for many years. And just to elaborate a little bit on my vision of this, why I would like to have 8 people is I would like to divide the year into quarters, have 2 members on each team, research those particular quarters, what's happening in the hive and so on. And also to, and tasks and the pollination sources. And one other thing is sort of the climate, how it's changed or what was and how it is now with respect to temperature and so on. And then I would have a Google spreadsheet or perhaps a PowerPoint that is a template that is shared between the members. There would be a meeting every 2 to 3 weeks to see we're on track. And then each of the teams would present to each other when we're completed to make sure everything's clear. And these are just highlights and PowerPoint little points. And then my goal would be to have this finished by the end of January and then go into design. So let's hope I can get 5 more people to work as a team. And if you're interested in this exciting opportunity, please contact me. My email's at the bottom of the slide here, Marion Whittam, my name, @gmail.com. Thank you so much. And
Lynn, did you have something you wanted to add to this? I see your hands up.
No, I just wanted to say me, pick me.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm in.
Okay.
For sure.
Very good. Okay, I'll over to you, Lucy.
Okay, thanks a lot, Marion. That was great. So we're on to our Be Educated section of our meeting, and we've got Stephanie Otto from the OBA TTP here. Stephanie has her BSc from the University of Guelph in environmental biology. Her interest in honeybees began when she took an undergrad honeybee course at the University of Guelph. This led her to a research technician position at the University of Guelph Honeybee Research Center, where she worked for 5 years. At the OBA Tech Transfer Program, she's been able to learn more about Ontario's beekeeping industry through meeting and speaking with beekeepers across the province. Welcome, Stephanie.
Great, thank you guys for having me. All right. Yeah, I guess I can get started with my presentation unless there was anything else. Lucy, perfect. All right, so I'm here tonight. We're going to be talking about honey crystallization. I guess I'll go ahead and share my screen. I can figure it out. All right, I'm going to share the whole screen and then we'll find it. There we go. All right, everyone can see that first slide there?
Yes.
Perfect. And I guess I can't see the chat, but I can see some people's windows. So if you have any questions, feel free to either do the raise hand function and I'll hopefully be able to notice. If not, just unmute yourself and you're welcome to just ask a question, jump in wherever you'd like. Okay, so before, I guess here's a quick little overview. So we're going to be talking about properties of honey, what's honey made of, why it crystallizes, how to prevent crystallization if that's your goal, and what can you do with crystallized honey. Just before I get started, here's a little bit about the tech transfer program. I'm sure you guys have heard this spiel a few times, depending on presentations you've been to. So I'm part of the Ontario Beekeepers Association Technology Transfer Program. So we work to conduct a bit of research throughout the province. We work with universities across Canada as well in different aspects of honeybee health and biology research, but we also have some services for beekeepers within the province. So we run the breeding program through the province. We're hoping to build up a little bit of resistance to Varroa and other diseases, but we also do education and outreach. So just like this, we do presentations, we'll run booths.
I'll do this stuff. I'll do it. I want to hear this one.
I guess just a reminder, make sure everyone's on mute. That would be helpful as well. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, and we do education and outreach. So just like this, we do presentations to beekeepers. We run courses as well. We currently, because of COVID, we're not running in-person workshops, but we do have 2 online courses that run, I think, every other week, just throughout the year online. And one is an introductory beekeeping and one is a IPM course, which are both highly recommended. All right, so to get into our honey topic. So this might be a review for some people, but I'd just like to go over quickly how honey is made. So bees collect nectar, they store it in their honey stomach when they fly back to the hive. In the honey stomach or honey crop, this is where enzymes are introduced into the honey. One of them, for example, called invertase, it converts the sucrose found in nectar and it converts it into glucose and fructose. So those are the dominant sugars that make up honey that we eat. The other enzymes from the honey stomach also introduce antibacterial properties into the honey, which I can touch on in a moment. So when the bees bring the honey back to the hive, they deposit it into the cells, but the nectar is still too wet to preserve effectively. So the workers will fan it with their wings, and they bring that honey down to about a 17.5% moisture content. So they're very precise. They're very good at bringing it very consistently down to that 17.5% moisture content. So at this level of moisture, the honey won't ferment or go bad, so it can be capped with wax and stored over the winter in the hive, which is very handy for them. Honey also has antibacterial properties, like I mentioned, and that's why honey is often recommended to help with sore throats or for helping with colds and things like that. But it also has a helpful wound healing properties as well. So physically, honey has a low pH, so it's very acidic, and it contains lots of sugar, as we know. So these two things make a very inhospitable environment for bacteria. Honey is a super saturated solution, so meaning it has more sugar held in the moisture than a normal solution would. So because of this, honey pulls moisture out of bacterial cells, and that damages and kills the bacteria as well. So it has that physical antibacterial property. Finally, honey contains an enzyme called glucose oxidase, which produces hydrogen peroxide when it's exposed to moisture. So when honey is put on skin or a wound, it will absorb moisture, and that enzyme converts, I think some of the sugars, don't quote me on that, but the sugars in the water, it converts it into hydrogen peroxide, so that has that antibacterial property as well. So it's so effective that it's frequently used at the Ontario Veterinary College for large burn victims. So when horse barns burn and they've got very large wounds on these big animals, they use raw honey, just like we would, I think it's like a silver oxide kind of dressing, I suppose, in hospitals. But it's just as effective as those commercially made burn treatments as well. All right, so getting into crystallization. Why does honey crystallize? Like I mentioned, honey is a super saturated solution. So there's more sugar in the liquid than it can hold. Under some conditions, those sugars will fall out of that solution and form solid crystals. It's a natural process, so most honeys will go through it after a given time and under the right conditions. All honeys will behave differently depending on the moisture content, the floral source, and how they're handled, but crystallization is generally controlled by a few different factors. So depending on how much glucose is in your honey compared to that fructose content, it may crystallize faster. So glucose is less soluble than fructose, and it will fall out of that solution easier. So you can see the picture on the far right. There's that liquid layer on the top versus that crystallized layer on the bottom. So that is an example of a honey that crystallized, but just the glucose did. So it fell out of the solution, it crystallized at the bottom, and on the top, it will be mostly that's sucrose. Sorry, the fructose. Thank you. So some examples of nectar that that will cause honey to crystallize faster would be canola or dandelion. I know especially with canola, when a beekeeper knows that they're near a canola field, they're going to want to extract that as soon as the canola is done blooming. They don't want to keep it in the hive. It'll crystallize the rest of the honey. They just like to keep it separate. In some cases, you can get honey that's separated. So that's what, like I said in that one picture there, but that top layer is at risk of fermenting. So because some of the sugar is falling out of the suspension, that top layer has a higher liquid content, and it can be at risk of fermenting when there's more liquid in the solution. The yeasts in the honey it's easier for them to become active and start fermenting. Time and temperature are my next factors for crystallization. They can influence the size of the crystals you get. So raw, unheated, unfiltered honey will often crystallize very fast, and it will often have small crystals. So you get a nice creamy texture similar to creamed honey. But colder temperatures can also help create finer crystals. So there's lots of different kind of factors that come into play. Large crystals form when honey is left slightly below room temperature, so maybe around 20 Celsius. And an example of a place like that might be a dark, cool cupboard. Large crystals also form in honey that has been remelted after it's already crystallized. So sometimes you see grocery store honey might have those big chunky crystals, and that's because it's been reheated. Debris from your hive or from your wax cappings can also provide a site for crystals to adhere to and begin growing as well. So those are some of those factors. And it's important to note every honey is different. So even with all those factors, even with all that being said, all honeys will be different. I'm sure you've all had honey do something completely different from what I've explained or gone against the rules that I just outlined. And these factors can be altered by the floral source, like I mentioned, even the region you're in, so different parts of Ontario, different parts of Canada, different parts of the world. Every honey is going to crystallize differently. And it can be very hard to predict, unfortunately. So we try to prevent honey from crystallizing using a few methods throughout our extraction process. You can remove as much of the particles from your honey as possible through settling and filtering. So there are lots of tools and equipment you can use for this. You can even make them yourselves if you wanted to give it a try. So some of those examples are on the screen, some mesh filters. Depending on personal preference, you can use the cone filters. They're kind of a looser mesh, or the ones that are pulled a little tighter. It's also best to do this in a warm room so that the honey can flow a bit easier and particles can rise to the top a little bit better. Keeping honey warm through your extraction process helps to melt any crystals that are forming. And you can do this also by using a heated settling tank. So that example in that image there, it's got a little bit of a heater attached, and it helps to keep the honey warm as it's settling, and that just increases the flow and helps things float to the top a bit easier too. Or keeping it in a hotter room, like I mentioned as well. For honey that is already bottled, you can further warm it to melt crystals. So if it's liquid, you can keep warming it to prevent any of those extra crystals that may be forming. So you can do this a few ways. You can purchase a pre-made warming cabinet. Some people like to do that. But also there's a lot of different DIY builds you can find online. So I'm sure there's lots of YouTube videos and blogs that have instructions for your own little DIY ones. I like the one on the right there with the 2 brood boxes. That's kind of I think a classic bee DIY there where you're using brood boxes. So just be aware that with honey that crystallizes once, if you're melting it again, it's likely to crystallize again. It's hard to get out all those crystals in one go once the process is already started. So if you have honey that's already crystallized, there's a few things we can do. For large scale beekeepers, they use an immersion melter, which they put into the barrel of a barrel that's been completely crystallized. So that center picture there, it kind of looks like a potato masher. You just plug it into the wall, you set your temperatures, and it will melt the barrel as it goes through. This is done if the beekeeper wants to obviously bottle the honey. It's very hard to bottle honey that's already crystallized, so it can be pumped out of those barrels a bit easier. For smaller scale beekeepers, you can use, like I mentioned before, that tank with that heating element, or a hot room, I suppose. It gets a little tougher when the honey's already been crystallized. So we like to say, I guess the best way is to just bottle it as quick as possible. And that gets a little bit easier when you're a smaller scale beekeeper. You can also run the risk of overheating your honey, which is something to be aware of. This can remove the antibacterial enzymes that give those good properties for your honey, but it can also change the color and the taste of the honey. So if it gets burnt, it might be a little less desirable. There are lots of different recommendations for which temperatures that you can heat your honey to. I don't like to give out like specific numbers. It's as long as it's not, I guess, pasteurization. So pasteurization would be briefly heated to 71 Celsius. But it can also be, honey can also be pasteurized if it's at 60 for a longer period of time, like a day or so. I have heard of people melting fully crystallized barrels at about 40 C, so much lower, and for about 4 days, so even longer than that. But I would recommend like a low and slow process if you're looking to melt any honey. And of course, my favorite thing to do with already crystallized honey is to just eat it the way it is. Crystallized honey is easy to scoop. It's easy to spread. It melts quickly in tea, just like a liquid honey would. Although it's not exactly the same as creamed honey, you can market it as smooth and having a nice texture. And if you haven't heated or filtered it once already, you can advertise it as raw or unprocessed, which are some nice buzzwords that everybody likes to hear. I've had some customers ask if crystallized honey has been adulterated or changed, or more sugars have been added after the fact. And I've had to explain that no, this is not the case. It's actually the opposite. So crystallization is that natural process that I mentioned earlier. If you're storing crystallized honey for long periods of time, you can store it in the freezer. That way it won't separate, like from that past photo. It would just take a lot longer for any of the movement of the crystals to do anything. So it prevents that separation, and it prevents the fermentation. But if you're using it often, you can just keep it out just like you would liquid honey. All right, that's my presentation. Thank you guys for listening.
I got questions for you.
Of course.
Okay. So you can stop.
Oh yes, I can stop sharing.
I was gonna say, I can't see myself. Okay, so I have all these bottles sitting beside me here. So I can't see myself, but I'm on, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I have honey that has crystallized naturally, and it's very even, right? So it's really even. If I were to open this up, it would be like all smooth, even. I have, early harvest, late harvest, although crazy enough, this is actually the early harvest. The early harvest is actually the dark honey this year, but you never know, right? Early honey, late harvest. And then I opened up the box and I have these honeys. And what I don't know is this what you're talking about, or is this one just not fully crystallized yet? So I have 4 jars like this. Almost all my jars, I have about 4 or 5 cases. They're completely crystallized by now. But these ones are kind of like, I don't know yet, are these just crystallizing or is this separated?
Yeah, I guess I didn't go over that. That's just starting to crystallize. So,
okay, but what the heck is going on with this one?
I think that one is also just crystallized, but when the honey crystallizes in the jar, it kind of pulls away from the glass.
Oh, is that when you get the frosting?
Yeah, is that the same on the dark one?
This is frosting on it, right? So you can see the little crystals at the top. Yeah, this is not the same.
Oh, maybe I can't see it as well.
It's not the same. I don't think. I usually try and change my labels every year so I know the seasons. But
here, could you hold it up one more time?
Sure. Which one? This weird one?
That one, yes. Oh, and the bottom is also crystallized?
Yep, the bottom is crystallized. I haven't stuck a spoon in. I can see some like frosting here, a little bit of crystals there. Now, is it? Yeah, it's really odd. And you can actually see a spot here where it looks like there might even be a little air gap. So if I want to make sure that this doesn't, no, it's not fermented. It's like, I use Sheila was asking if it was fermented, but I use a hydrometer before I bottle my honey and I check it. So all of my honey is always below 18%. Otherwise, I take care. I use it for other things. So that's not fermented honey. That's not what fermented honey looks like. I've fermented honey on purpose sometimes. It doesn't look like this. But what I was wondering is this honey that was sitting beside a radiator and melted funny?
Can you just hold it up a little bit longer? I don't know if I've seen that. So it looks like there's two different crystal sizes, maybe. Like the top layer is.
I haven't had this much, like whatever. But so if I was worried about it, would I just simply warm it up so that to make sure that I don't have a different gradient of moisture between the areas in the honey? That would solve the problem.
I would think warming
just melt it out.
Yeah, warming it in a melting cabinet, or if it's just for personal use in like a water bath, I would assume would melt the crystals, or as much of the crystals visually, I guess, so it would look nicer.
Yeah,
you mentioned radiator, so maybe
this one was sitting beside a radiator, and I wondered if it had started to crystallize, but one side was getting warmer because the heat came on this week. And so this was the corner of the box. And I thought, oh, maybe that's what this is. Maybe this is just like was beside the radiator. Because I certainly, I do keep my personal honey. I keep it on the radiator. But this was out of the stash that I was going to sell. But I actually use a cooler and a sous vide to reheat my honey, because then I can reheat it at like 95 or 97. It just takes a couple of days. And then I don't worry about overheating my honey.
Yeah, I've never seen that. Maybe just the one side warmed up differently and then crystallized again differently. But yeah, that's really
no, definitely not. So if honey, she was asking, what does honey look like if it has been if it's fermented? I can tell her because I've done it, but
so I guess I can start with in the frame. So when you're extracting honey, if a frame of fully capped honey is starting to crack a little bit, the cappings are maybe coming off or cracking, or if you stick your finger in to the honey and lots of bubbles come out of the cappings, that is an indicator that it's crystallized. It also will smell quite different as well. So it'll smell kind of like, just like a fermenty, kind of like apple cidery kind of smell maybe. And when you taste it, obviously it's got a bit of a sour taste. So once it's in the bottle, I think you would maybe see a bit of bubbling continuing, and then it would taste and smell a little off as well.
Somebody was asking what the max temp to warm crystallized honey is.
You still want to call it raw?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So when you do, just a reminder, when you do heat honey, I guess there is no rules around what raw honey is technically, but when you do heat it, it's no longer raw. It's been processed in some way. But I have heard, for the barrel example that I gave, I know someone that has a big immersion melter, so those potato masher looking ones, and they set it to 40 Celsius for 4 days. So it's very slow and very low, I guess. But depending who you talk to, people will melt their honeys at any different temperatures for any different times. I think it's worth talking to some nice, long, tried and tested beekeepers for getting ideas for that one.
If you do have fermented honey, it's still safe. In fact, some people enjoy fermented honey. And if ever, and I made fermented garlic in honey. So we stuffed the jar of honey full of raw garlic to get it to ferment. So it's considered an herbal remedy in many cultures. So there is lots of uses even for fermented honey.
Yeah, I think I've had a bottle that I had maybe a little too long in the on the counter, and it started getting a little smelly, but I just finished eating it. It was fine. Personal use, it's fine.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions for Stephanie?
Me, I have one.
Yes, please.
So do you have any examples of flowers that they make honey that crystallizes with separation, like the one you had on the right side?
I am not sure with like floral source that will separate specifically, but when it comes to floral sources that crystallize faster, I would guess they would have a higher chance of separating like that. But with the separation, as far as I know, that's just a time factor. So first the honey will crystallize, and then once it's crystallized and sitting out for a long time, then eventually that glucose will fall out of suspension. So I'm unsure if there's any floral sources specifically, but it's definitely a time thing. I think after a while, there's a potential for the crystallized honey to separate like that.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that presentation.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me.
I think it's something that we're all going through maybe a little bit now with what we've harvested over the summer period going into the fall.
Mm-hmm.
So great topic. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
We can take a 10-minute break for everybody to grab some libations and then get settled in for our main speaker. It should be very interesting. So it's 7:06 right now. We'll come back at 7:16. Thank you.
And unfortunately, I have to head out, but it was very nice seeing you all. Have a great night.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Okay, we're back. Today, our main speaker is Dr. David Wallace-Hare. He is an environmental historian of ancient and medieval beekeeping. He is the editor of New Approaches to the Archaeology of Beekeeping. This is going to be put out by Archaeopress, Oxford. The volume to be published this fall is a collection of 16 case studies of wide temporal and geographic focus within the Mediterranean and Europe, demonstrating new approaches in the field, and is the only handbook of recent date for historical and archaeological apicultural research. His research into historical beekeeping is rooted in practical knowledge, as well as holding certificates in beekeeping from the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology and Penn State University. In July of 2021, he completed a unique 4-part certificate program in urban agriculture offered by Purdue University to gain greater perspective on a longer-term project on the history of urban beekeeping. Welcome, David.
Thank you. I'll share my screen now. Thank you for setting that up. Okay, I think you should be able to see it in a second. Can you see everything?
Yes.
Okay, great. I will keep my eye on the time. I don't plan to go the full time because I want to leave time for questions, but there's various points within the presentation that I'll be reaching out directly to ask questions. And you can also ask them at the end of the presentation. The questions will probably be at the end more likely to be focused on the archaeology, this first half of the presentation, but the second half on these Roman diagnoses of bee diseases, I have questions throughout. But you can raise your hand or just chime in, unmute. It's a very small group, which it's great. Or you can use the chat box. Any of those means is fine. So I'm just going to keep it very light, despite the very gruesome topic that is to the side. But firstly, thank you for having me. Secondly, this project, what I'm talking about tonight, is connected with a book I'm writing for Routledge, Bee Health and Behavior in Pre-Modern Iberia, looking at basically agricultural and beekeeping manuals over a 2,000-year period in the Iberian Peninsula, and basically trying to find out how people are building up a science of beekeeping in this area that we have a lot of archaeological evidence for, and I guess agronomic, agricultural knowledge for. So some of it's sort of stumbling to find things, but you do find occasionally really cool stuff and sort of the development of experiential sort of knowledge about bees, which don't represent any other farm animal that the Romans or others in the Iberian Peninsula who succeeded them have. So it's a very strange creature. In keeping with that strangeness, I cite a 10th century volume called the Geoponica. It's a Byzantine agricultural manual that has this way of replacing bees that have suffered essentially colony collapse, disappeared all at once. The process is called the boogonia, or the ox birth or ox generation. It's first mentioned in authors like Virgil, but it harkens back to Mago, this Carthaginian agriculturalist from the 3rd century BCE, and also Democritus, this Greek philosopher. So it's questionable, of course, whether it would work or not, but it hints at the very strange world of pre-modern beekeeping. So I'll read it out. This is the more scientific version than Virgil's very strange version, which happens within the context of his agricultural poem, the Georgics, which records sort of how to farm, but in a poetic form. There, a character, Aristaeus, an Arcadian shepherd, chases Orpheus's wife, Eurydice. In pursuit of her, she gets bitten by a snake. She dies, and this is why Orpheus has to go down to the underworld. And then he doesn't retrieve her because he looks back and she sees her and she disappears again. Anyways, Aristaeus is the one who causes this. As a punishment for that, he loses all of his bees. He's the inventor of beekeeping. I should also mention that. And he has to find out, how do I replace my bees? Well, he goes on a long journey involving shapeshifters and other things. And he learns that to replace your bees, you have to kill an ox, stuff its mouth shut and all of its orifices, wait a period, and bees will spontaneously generate from the corpse. This has a sort of longer lifespan than that initial thing. For instance, the evolved form of this is found in this Byzantine text, the Geoponica. It says, build a house 10 cubits high. A cubit is the distance between your elbow and your forefinger, by the way. Super irregular, as everybody has different sized arms. That's probably why we don't use it anymore. Anyways, with all the sides of equal dimensions, with 1 door and 4 windows on each side, put an ox into it, 30 months old, very fat and fleshy, led a number of young men. I don't know why that has to be young men. Maybe it's faster. Kill him by beating him violently with clubs so as to mangle both flesh and bones, taking care not to shed any blood. I don't know how that could happen. Let all the orifices, mouth, eyes, nose, be stopped up with clean and fine linen, impregnated with pitch. Let a quantity of thyme be strewn under the reclining animal, and let the windows and doors be closed and covered with a thick coating of clay to prevent the access of air or wind. After 3 weeks have passed, let the house be opened and let light and fresh air get access to it, except from the side which the wind blows strongest. I guess that's an important feature. Can't say that I've wanted to reproduce the begonia. 11 days afterwards, you'll find a house full of bees, hanging together in clusters, and nothing left of the ox but horn, bones, and hair. So very strange. Thankfully, other authors have a much more scientific approach to beekeeping. Yet has a strange lifespan, but it's in extreme circumstances where you'd see something crazy like that. You know, that's on the odd end, because typically, and I'll talk about this later, we don't lose all of our bees at once in the ancient world. It's very rare to have that happen. So the first part of my talk, I'm going to be talking about just an overview of the archaeology of beekeeping, because it's beekeeping in the pre-modern period is very different than beekeeping now. Just in terms of what people are using to keep bees, what we have that's left of what people used to keep bees from 2,000 years ago. I'll be focusing on Roman beekeeping because we have a lot of evidence for this. Interestingly, we have the most evidence for Roman beekeeping because they used ceramic beehives also, and so did the Greeks. But they also used organic hives made out of organic materials like cork, wicker, and wood, which have disintegrated. Unfortunately, medieval populations also used those. So we have 2 poles now and the ancient world, which used a lot of ceramic. And there's a lot in between that we don't have. We have more beekeeping manuals and things, but for the archaeological evidence, we need to actually go back to the ancient world, which is very strange to think about it that way. So I'll be talking about that. Second half of the presentation, I'll be talking more specifically about Roman bee diseases and how we can sort of perhaps connect archaeological to textual evidence, which is where the majority of our Roman bee disease type stuff exists. This is a painting of the begonia, obviously not a depiction, but there's not many paintings because it's a very gruesome thing, but I think it's a very sort of striking image, especially the color scheme. I think it was very well executed. So I ask you to consider the following scenario. It's the 1st century AD. You're a member of the Roman elite with 1 or more agriculturally successful villas in Italy and Spain, a province of the Roman Empire. You've been asked by friends, aka you yourself, to write a book on farming to share your wise ways with the public, your peers. You set out to cover all aspects of Roman farming, wine production, staple crops, fruit orchards, so that you can have vineyards, animal husbandry, but you also want to address new revenue streams that are coming to fore in the 1st century BCE and 1st century CE or AD. And these are raising birds, chickens, doves, peacocks, Numidian chickens, so North African chickens, guinea fowl, geese, ducks, having fish ponds, so live aquariums on your farm, and beekeeping. So that's an important addition and a newer addition to Roman agricultural manuals that's sort of picking up in the 1st century CE. It's not as if people didn't keep bees, but the science of beekeeping in a written form is not something you see before the 1st century, 2nd century BCE. With this last one, not much gets written on it if you're writing in the 1st century CE, but you also keep ways in ways that you've developed yourself. And so they might be based on local methods, among other things. And also the people you may in fact possess. If you are a Roman villa owner, you probably have a large caterer or complement of slaves. Some of these will be your beekeepers as well. So the Roman agricultural manuals are both an HR text, a people management or operational text, but also knowledge of the scientific element of beekeeping. And from that perspective, they're very different from medieval beekeeping manuals, which replace the sort of first person narrative and become much more close to the matter than the agricultural texts of the Roman period. But I'll be focusing on the Roman period for this presentation. Your method of beekeeping is based on analogy from farm animals you own, because bees are a wild animal in Roman law, and as we know, and require a certain approach to their care and acquisition. So, for example, a question you might ask is, who owns Roman bees? Anyone does. This is a text from the digest, which was written in the 533 CE and promulgated, drafted by the Emperor Justinian. It's a collection of different juristic writings from the previous 5 centuries and before, and is what we consider when we think of Roman law, sort of the basis of codified law in Europe. It has a really interesting passage on who can own bees that has a lot of sort of food for thought about how we consider bees as a thing that we want to classify and write agricultural knowledge about. The sort of tech transfer of the ancient world is sort of pulling that in. So wild animals are understood to recover their natural freedom when our eyes can no longer perceive them. That's important in Roman law. If you can see it, it can still be yours if it's a wild animal, or if they can be seen when their pursuit is difficult. It has been asked whether a wild animal which has been wounded in such a way that it can be captured is understood immediately to become our property. It was held by the jurist Trebatius that it at once belongs to us and continues to do so while we pursue it. But if we should cease to pursue it, it will no longer be ours and will again become our property, the property of the first one who takes it. Therefore, if during the time that we're pursuing it, another should take it with the intention himself of profiting by its capture, it will be held to have been committed a theft against us. Many authorities do not think that it will belong to us unless we capture it, because many things happen to prevent us from doing so. This is the better opinion. So there's this back and forth constantly in these Roman legal texts. Here's where it gets to the bees. The nature of bees also is wild. Hence, if they settle upon one of our trees, they are not considered to belong to us until we have enclosed them in a hive. So you have to hive the bees first in order to possess them. Any more than birds who have settled their nests in our trees. So you can capture birds as well this way. Therefore, if anyone should shut up bees, he will become their owner. Likewise, if a bee makes honey, anyone can take possession of it without being guilty of theft. But as we've already stated, if anyone enters upon the land of another for such a purpose, he can be legally forbidden by the owner from doing so, if the latter is aware of his intention. A swarm of bees which has left our hive is understood to be ours as long as we keep it in sight, and its pursuit is not difficult. Otherwise, it becomes the property of the first one who takes it. Sort of scary thought, but we can't sort of mark bees. So I guess that's still the same now. I have a question for you is, what domesticated and semi-domesticated animals you could raise today most resemble how you take care of bees in terms of their housing, feeding, and medicine? If you were to write a manual, what animals would you most compare bees to? It's just a quick question for the audience.
Passenger pigeons?
So we have passenger pigeons as one. Others? I'm going to check the chat box just in case. Okay, so if you think of some in the context, you can write them in the chat box. I don't want to take too much time on that one. But passenger pigeons is a good one. And if you think, what animals do you think that the Romans had analogs for bee care? You would be right. It's birds and fish farms. Yeah. So those two things are very common. Why is this? Well, we find out from, for instance, that same Roman legal text that, okay, it went back to there, that the natural sort of comparison for the Romans was birds. Peacocks and pigeons are also wild. And because they fly away and return, they have very many parallels for the Romans. And this isn't only legally, but also in terms of agriculture. So bees cross boundaries like many other animals. We tend not to think about this today because if you're keeping bees in the city, you typically will not have many other animals, maybe roosters or chickens at most. So like birds, doves, thrushes, and ducks you own, bees can fly and are mobile, returning home routinely, but unable to be monitored 24/7. Like bees produce products that humans use through their processing of food that humans may not have access to. Unlike birds, bee flesh is not eaten, and we don't eat their eggs. Bird foods may overlap with human food, but this is rarely the case with bees. Ancient sources thought bees collected honey. Some strange authors, although other authors disagree with this, even in antiquity, that bees collected not pollen to produce honey, but the dew that lands on flowers, which is crazy. And that it was from the pollen, that's what they made the wax out of. So that's how it's separated. That other authors think differently, but it's a complicated issue how bees make honey in antiquity and in the medieval period. Like fish, bees can swim away or fly away in this case, but if they're contained in fish are contained in a tank on a farm, then they can't. So bees sort of participate in a number of different categories, not all one, that make them difficult to classify. So I'm going to briefly go through now why also ancient beekeeping is a bit stranger than others by doing a very swift whirlwind review of what we know about ancient beekeeping and some archaeological evidence that sort of gets into the fine-grained detail about ancient beekeeping. So our first example of and our best preserved example of an apiary comes from 900 BCE, an apiary that burned down in the middle of a town called Tarehof now in northern Israel. This is a very strange apiary, in part because it was in the middle of a city, an ancient city. So it's our first example of urban beekeeping. You can see the apiary here. This black mark at the top of the top right photo is the burn mark, the destruction layer that effectively preserved everything in this apiary in a very great state of preservation. The apiary was in the bottom floor of a building, and I'll show you some better pictures here. So the apiary was in the top quadrant of the city, right in the middle of the city. It was in a basement, and when the destruction layer, when the apiary was burned all at once for some reason in 900 BCE, the roof collapsed over top of it, but we know that the bees would have had access to this basement through high windows that were placed above human height at the walking sort of level of the people in the city. So that bee and human space wouldn't have interacted, which is sort of cool and a good design feature. So the bees were below humans so that they would not sort of occupy the same space and sort of bother the citizens of this or inhabitants of the city. We get a lot of stuff from this apiary. So as you can see, these round things here, these are the hives. Most beekeeping that we have preserved in these sort of types of hives, these long tubes, and I'll show you more example of these, are horizontal beehives, not the vertically operated hives that we're more familiar with today. From those hives, because there was still bee matter in them, bee bread and pollen and other samples, and even crushed up bees, the authors of this, the excavators of this area, Emi Haimaser and Nava Panitz-Cohen, got incredibly detailed information from pollen samples and other things, and even the skeletal or sort of zooarchaeological remains of bees, so that they could even identify the species of bee used in the area, an Anatolian variety that was imported to the area, perhaps the authors suggest because of its docility for an urban context. So there's a bunch of really cool stuff for this specific site. Can we deduce the health of the bees from one bee? No, also because it's smashed, it's not in a good state when the whole apiary burns down. So connecting health to this is a bit, of a moot point. But we do get a lot of very detailed information about bees from this apiary. Similarly, another apiary that was again burned down. It's like people have a beef against apiaries in antiquity, I guess. Not in a civic context. This is more of a rural one in northern Italy, near Mantua. You can see this map at the top. Mantova is Mantua in Italian. At this city called Forcello, from the 5th century BCE, so 500 to 400 BCE. This apiary was also burned down. Great state of preservation. Very different area ecologically. With this, we have, again, preserved hives, but interestingly this time, preserved bee bread, which is really cool. And we got a lot of, not we, but the authors of this text have a lot of information that they derive from this as well. They have derived pollen samples from this bee bread and also preserved bee skeletons, which is important, and the shape of sort of the comb structure, which is really cool. They couldn't determine what species was being used here at this time, like the other example, which was, by the way, the first example of bee importation, which is pretty cool. But from this sample, they could determine a lot of cool stuff. The bee bread allowed the authors of the study to look at the pollen signatures of the honey that was produced in this area. They found that it consisted of at least like 10 or about 10 central sort of floral signatures. Interestingly, all of these signatures were found to be connected to river flowers that grow on riverbeds, which is unusual. Why would they all be connected to flowers that grow on riverbeds? Well, the area, if you go back to this, Forcello is on a river system, sure, and that could be one case. But another reason is that the author suggests that this is an example of river beekeeping. So one author in antiquity, Pliny the Elder, mentions a village in the same area called Hostilia, and the following anecdote. He says, located on the shores of the river Po, whose inhabitants, when the fodder of their bees is lacking in the immediate area, set the hives on boats and at night convey them upriver for a distance of miles. Disembarking at the first light, the bees, after taking their fill, daily fly back to the vessels, which change their position each day, so as not to jar them, I guess. They do this until the boats are weighed down or they're by their very burden of honey, and they are assumed to be full. Once the ships are brought back, the hives are removed. And he says that incidentally in Spain, they also do this using the backs of mules for similar reasons. So Pliny the Elder, this author, was born in northern Italy, so he has a very detailed information about this area. So the authors were linking this to this anecdote and suggested that this was itinerant beekeeping, which is also pretty cool. The area that I work on is the area where we have probably the most archaeological remains of these ceramic hives that you see to the bottom left. From sort of the 5th century BCE to the 2nd century CE, from various populations, mostly in the area of Valencia. These are Iberian hives at the bottom. These would have been accessed from in a very different way than modern hives. And the Romans sort of took this up again when they conquered Iberia in the 2nd century BCE and started keeping bees there as well, using local ways of beekeeping. Our first example representation of a beekeeper, by the way, anywhere, is from the Neolithic, and it's from B Corp Valencia, this picture of this honey hunter climbing a wall. This is a cave painting as well, to the right. So a long tradition of beekeeping in the area. So an area that I work on is in the center of Spain called Segobriga. It's to the east of Valencia, and it makes use of a similar type of horizontal beekeeping, using these hives stacked up in tubes, row upon row, very similar to Talrehof. And you can see these hives here. they would have been accessed very differently. I'm sure you can see that there's a number of problems with this type of beekeeping. One, you can't observe the comb structures inside very easily. This type of beekeeping is continued into the medieval period as well, with these bee houses called arnales in the Catalonia area and central Spain. But it's a preserved way of keeping bees from antiquity. Now, the reason why we know about beekeeping from antiquity is because of the use of these ceramic type hives. There are other types of hives that are in use. As I digress, interestingly, from that same area of Segobriga in central Spain, you can see a map down below, sort of central Spain near Catalonia. We have this area that produces this type of stone called Lapis Speculatus. It was famous in the Roman Empire because it was clear and could be used to make windows instead of making glass, which was an expensive process. Interestingly, Pliny the Elder, again, the same person who was also procurator of Spain, sort of governor of Roman Spain at one point, he says that observational hives were made out of this material so that people could observe what bees were doing inside, which is a thing that you couldn't do with those ceramic hives. So you could build ports into hive sides to see what was happening inside. They were sort of fascinated by this idea of having observational hives because we just didn't know a lot about, or I'm associating myself with them. They didn't know a lot about what was going on inside the hive during the honey making process. So that's a problem with Roman beekeeping in general. So where do we have these hives and where are they from? Well, they're from the area, mostly from Roman Spain, is a very dense sort of part of them. And before I go on to some other stuff, I just want to point out that inside these ceramic hives, they're usually lined with these striations, these stripes that you can see from the bottom left picture. These stripes or sort of scratches are supposed to help the comb adhere to the side of the hive. And usually when we find these in fragments, these striations are the way that you can detect that these are hives versus like a Roman clay pipe or something. Unless you have these, the end point of the hive with the flight holes for the bees to get in. That's a pretty obvious, these two little holes at the bottom. That's where the bees fly in and out. The Romans had things like hive extenders and entrance reducers and other things, but on these hives, we don't have all of the other sort of bells and whistles that we find mentioned in agricultural texts. So the other areas that we have these are Central Greece, Roman Athens, and Roman Crete down here. There's some from Roman North Africa and some from Roman Portugal as well. So you'll note that all of these are coastal areas, which is very strange and unusual, that all of the other areas might be using organic hives made of cork, wicker, or wood. In fact, unfortunately, ceramic hives were the least liked according to Roman agricultural sources. So the Roman agricultural author Columella, who I'll talk about in the second half of the presentation coming up very shortly, says that when the sites had been arranged, and he writes, Columella's writing a Roman agricultural manual called On Agriculture from the 1st century CE. He's also from Roman Spain. He says, on the choice of beehives must be constructed in accordance with local conditions. If the place is rich in cork trees, we shall make the most serviceable hives from their bark because they're neither cold in winter nor hot in summer. Or if it grows plenty of fennel stalks, these two, since they resemble the nature of bark, receptacles can be quite as conveniently made by weaving them together, like a skeps. If neither of these materials is at hand, the hives could be made of planting withes together, again, like a skeps. If these are not available, you'll have to make the tree with sort of log planks. Lastly, those made of earthenware have the worst qualities of all, since they are burnt by the heat of the summer and cook the bees and frozen by the cold of winter. However, theoretical archaeologists have recreated these ceramic hives and tested them using sort of thermometers. They don't do this. There's just some beef against this type of hive. Columella also doesn't like hives made of brick, sort of very stationary hives, because if disease happens within the apiary, they can't be moved very quickly. And so that's one of the primary reasons for not having hives made out of heavier materials. Yeah, of interest to you, perhaps, as a group, is the fact that we actually have examples of top bar hives from the Minoan period or suspected top bar hives, where you would lay some sort of stick over the top of this ceramic vessel. These are from sort of the 1300s, 1800s to 1500s BCE from Crete. You'd lay a stick over top and you would harvest you could pull the comb out and observe these structures and what was happening with the bees at all times. This is a suspected one. I wouldn't say we have a lot of evidence for this, and it might just be wishful thinking. I would hope not, because I think it's very cool. On a side note, and I might go through this a little more quickly, we have other types of ceramic related to beekeeping in the form of honey pots. These are mostly found from the Iberian Peninsula. They have a characteristic rim that was filled with water to prevent ants from going in. The ants would fall in the water and drown, presumably. With these, we actually can do some, and this is how we find them when we find these rims. They usually connote honey pots. They were also used in the medieval period, which is helpful for thinking about their form. And in some other areas of the Mediterranean, such as Etruria in northern Italy. We've tested some of these vessels, and they contain some unusual features chemically, doing organic chemical residue analysis. The honey that was coated in some of these vessels from Roman Spain contained cholesterol, which is very strange. It's surmised that during the honey extraction process, when the wax is crushed, because they just rip out the sort of combs from those long tubes and pressed, that some of the larvae get crushed into the honey, and this is what's producing the cholesterol. Someone thought that, oh, maybe it's from the handling of the material of the ceramic, maybe some cholesterol from hands got onto the ceramic. No, after so many tests of many different honey pots and hives, we found that it was actually cholesterol from the larva. Yum. So in this last very smaller part of the presentation, and I am aware of time, I want to talk about diagnosing Roman bee pathologies. I'm mostly relying on Columella's On Agriculture, which is our central and most scientific Roman agricultural text. He is from southern Spain, Cadiz, from the Roman province of Baetica. He died about 70 CE, so he's writing in the 1st century CE. The book is very big. He also discusses beekeeping just after he discusses poultry and fish ponds. So there's a linkage here, perhaps, in how he approaches bees as well in terms of their care. This is a statue of him from Cadiz in southern Spain, because sort of a famous figure from the town. So Columella has a lot to say about bee health and is one of our central sources. He begins his section on bee health by saying, if they're carefully looked after, they live for 10 years, but no swarm can exceed this age, even if young stock is substituted yearly in place of those which have died. For usually in the 10th year, all the population of the whole hive is destroyed and exterminated. In order, therefore, that this may not be the fate of the whole apiary, fresh stock must be continuously propagated, and care must be taken in the spring, when the fresh swarms issue forth, that they're intercepted and the number of dwelling places increases. For bees are often overtaken by diseases. True enough. As I said, Columella also discusses the Bugonia, but he thinks it's superfluous. He believes, because, as I quote, since I am in agreement with another scientist, Celsus, who very wisely said that there's never such mortality among these creatures that it's necessary to procure them by this means all at once. This is a world without colony collapse disorder. So he thinks that Bugonia is bogus because he's never seen a whole hive or swarm just disappear, which is very strange to think. So one of the things I wanted to point out in the last little bit is the very vague nature of Roman terminology related to bees. So this is his intro to the beekeeping section on disease. Remedies are needed for the remedies for the diseases of bees, those which are suffering from disease, morbus, or pestilence, pestilentia. The ruinous disease of pestilence, and I've given you the Latin terms in brackets, is rare in bees, nor can I find anything which ought to be done other than what we've prescribed in the case of other animals, except that hives should be moved far away. But the causes of other ailments in bees are easily diagnosed and remedied.
Oh, you found it? Yeah. Thank you.
but the causes of common ailments in bees are more easily diagnosed.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just make sure you're muted, please.
Okay, no worries. The most serious distemper, labor annuus, at the beginning of spring when the spurge bush flowers and the elms put forth their bitter blossoms. For as by fresh apples, so are they allured by early flowers and eat greedily of them. And after winter hunger, such food not being hurtful, when not eaten beyond satiety, but when they've gorged themselves abundantly, they die from a flux of the belly unless help is given quickly. For spurge loosens the bowels in the larger animals as well, but elm has this effect particularly on bees. So one of the things you'll note here, A, Roman bee terminology for diseases is crazy vague, and B, it's very much linked to diet. So they think that disease is not caused by pests, but rather by what the bees are eating or not eating. And they think that certain trees, and there's other examples of this, will affect the health of bees if they're eating too much of it. Elms, for instance, set them off, and they think, I'm guessing, what they're describing here is bee diarrhea. So, I don't think that this is probably the case that they're eating elms, but the Romans seem to think so. The treatments, and this is where I want to ask a few questions of you, are interesting. So there's an old form of treatment that Columella doesn't like. He says at the beginning of spring, if you supply them with medicated food by means of the same remedies, it's possible to provide them against being troubled by plague, again, vague pestis of this kind, and also to cure them when they're already suffering from it. I don't venture to insist on the treatment that Hyginus, another author, suggests. For his instructions are, when a plague of this kind attacks bees, and the bodies are found in heaps under the honeycombs, lay them aside in a dry place before the winter, at about the same spring equinox, when the mildness of the day invites us, bring them into the sunshine after the first hour and cover them with figwood ashes. If this is done, he declares within 2 hours, they'll be brought to life by the quickening breath of the heat. They begin to breathe again and crawl into a vessel provided for this purpose, if it is placed in their way. So what we can say is, bodies are found in heaps under the honeycombs. This could be any number of different things. So it's hard to pinpoint what exactly it would be. So many maladies of bees would just cause them to pass out. We don't have any descriptions of the morphology, what's happening with the bees themselves, just that they die, and this strange remedy, which Columella essentially is saying is old-fashioned. Here's where we get to specifics. We rather that they may not perish are of the opinion that the diet, which we will forthwith describe, this is an older translation, should be put before the swarms when they are sick, the Igra examina or sick swarms. For they ought to be given either seeds of pomegranate bruised and sprinkled with Ammonaean wine, or raisins with an equal quantity of Syrian sumac soaked in rough wine, or if these are not taken, or if these are without effect taken separately, all the same ingredients should be pounded in equal quantities into a single mass and boiled in an earthenware vessel, again with Ammonaean wine, and then allowed to cool right away and be placed before the bees in wooden troughs. My question to you is, do you think bees would eat and enjoy wine? And why do you think this would be a positive remedy? Any feedback on the wine issue? So someone's saying fondant. Yeah, I was thinking that too. This is some sort of Roman fondant. No sugar exists at this time, of course. So what do you feed bees with? Wines were probably sweet. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. And they pound it up into this mush so that the bees can access it and eat it easier. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Would it have cured whatever they were sick with? I don't know. It's a classic Roman thing to like throw wine at things. And it's sort of surprising to think that but if they're producing wine on the farm as well, it's something quick to hand, and this is maybe why they're using wine. I was thinking fondant as well. I'm glad that you also think the same way. Someone that we're on the same page here. We still make teas for bees in Romania. Cool. Okay. So we have another. Lastly, there's just one other thing. More, and this is where we get some actual description of something perhaps we can identify. That disease is particularly remarkable, which makes them hideous and shrunken and consumes them, when some often carry out the abodes of the bodies of which have died, while others remain listless within their dwellings in sad silence, as though in time of public mourning. When this happens, food is offered to them, poured into troughs made of reeds, especially boiled honey, pounded up with oak apple and dried rose. You can also burn galbanum, which they may be cured by this odor, and to keep up their strength when they may be exhausted, you can use raisin wine and boiled down wine must. And then you also can use the root of starwort, the bushy part of the plant, which is yellow and its flower purple. Apparently that has some relevance here. Is this enough information for anyone to make any sort of description of what sort of disease may be plaguing these bees when their bodies are shrunken? Do you have any ideas about what this might be? I thought it was perhaps referring to, and this is me grasping at straws, bee paralysis virus. I don't know. Any ideas for this top description in blue? Whatever they're doing here to the bees, I don't know. I mean, just feeding them, you know, they seem thin, so they need food. That's, I think, the idea here. But is this enough information to make any diagnosis of what is going on here in terms of what's afflicting them? You can think on that. I don't want to. So I'll come back to this slide in the question period, but I'll let you think about that. And then there, you know, I'm just going to skip this one because I don't think it's really helpful. So eating the wrong food seems to be something that the Romans really were concerned about with bees. There's a bunch of foods that the Romans thought were good for bees. Columella has a list of bee forage, which he thinks is good. For instance, ivy has good qualities for bees. I've highlighted these in yellow. He thinks that yew trees don't make bees sick. So he said this yews are being excluded as being hurtful. Sicilian saffron bulbs are planted to give and scent honey to give it certain properties. Alternatively, and I'll come back to these, thyme and a bunch of different plants are used to provide good health to bees, apparently. Simply because bees like to eat it, that must mean it's good and healthy for them. That's, you know, if all the foods that I liked were just good and healthy for me, then I would be a very happy person eating pizza all the time. But, you know, that's clearly not the case here. But it's odd that the Romans are linking the diet so much to the health of bees. And we tend not to think about bees foraging on plants as a particularly negative thing. But for the Romans, diet and medicine were so closely entwined that this is really, and Greek medicine as well, this was a very human application to a bee problem. Now, yeah, yews, I already mentioned that. So in conclusion, and you know, I think I'm just barely on time. I've been looking at various different Roman agricultural manuals, trying to determine why the Romans are sort of approaching bees in the way that they're approaching them. As I've been going on with this, I've noticed that they're constantly grouping bees and birds together in various agricultural manuals, stretching from the 1st century BCE all the way to the 1300s in various Arabic agricultural texts from the same area of Spain. Birds and bees constantly linked together. I don't think it's just a grouping. And I need to do more work on what the Romans and other authors thought about bird disease and how they treated bird disease and whether there are parallels for bees, because I find that because bees are the only insect that the Romans and medieval populations raised until the advent of the silkworm, at least in the East, that they don't know a lot about how bees work, how to find bees. They develop some sort of senses of this, but how they behave, they often employ their own human analogies for this, but they're also having to create their own analogies because insects operate so differently than other farm animals that are kept. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions. I'll stop the share. think I like packed too much, and I maybe 5 slides I could have taken out.
No, I wish you'd slow down a little bit. It was fascinating. It was really good.
I'm happy to go back to any specific slide that you'd like. If there's some, as I may have sped through some of it a little bit. There's just a lot to cover with, compressing the archaeological material down. Maybe I could have cut some of that out, but thank you for inviting me. So I see some questions coming up. Go ahead.
Do you keep bees, David?
I would like to have the opportunity to keep bees wherever I am, but it always seems to be that I'm constantly moving or don't have enough time to. This is something I plan to do very soon. I'm moving to the UK for a new job in January to Exeter on this sort of tree resiliency project, and so I'll be there for 3 years. I hope that I can interact with the bees on that campus and sort of get back into doing this like on a consistent basis. But I've just been too many different places recently, and it's my wife does not keep bees. She also it's been difficult. Yeah, it would be difficult to keep bees right now for this stage in my life.
Sorry, so that was my question there. I would wonder what you're taking from your research and then sort of using like as a beekeeper, like if you thought that there were relevant things that you could take from back then and maybe use them now that we're not using already.
I think urban beekeepers are doing this already. It's just it's more similar to beekeeping in antiquity, the small scale. And I think the large scale is something new, and it's the science that's developed around large scale beekeeping is more created at the time that was sort of becoming a thing. Whereas small scale beekeeping, urban beekeeping is by nature it's typically small scale. It's more similar to the volumes that we'd see kept for bees in antiquity, and except for some certain industrial apiaries. What can be taken from ancient beekeeping? I think just the one thing that, and I think that a recent documentary or movie Honeyland, it was produced in the last few years, does is, not taking honey from bees or not collecting it for a few years while the hive is getting started up. That's something that Roman beekeepers are doing, or only collecting a portion of the honey. But that's something individual beekeepers might be doing anyways, not taking all of the honey. There is some supplementary feeding going on during the wintering process for beekeeping in the ancient and medieval period, but it varies. Some beekeepers in some parts of Europe will kill the bees when they harvest the honey and just collect a new swarm. And so obviously that's not a good strategy. Other beekeepers will know how to overwinter hives. Well, part that I didn't go on talk about in Columella's text is how you overwinter hives and the health that you need to think about of the bees inside if you can't see them. So Columella says that some people, and this is really bizarre, kill a bird, rip open its guts, and have the sort of heated entrails, and they stuff it inside the hive so that it keeps them warm. And he thinks that this is pretty stupid for a variety of reasons. Firstly, how is it going to last throughout the winter? Is the bird going to be consistently alive for, I don't know, 5 months or 3 months? No, of course not. And so he says that the bees, if they don't like the heat, they'll just, leave the corpse alone and not do anything. It seems like a horrible idea, but people are trying to think about overwintering. Columella's constantly worried about how much water his bees are getting in Italy and in southern Spain, so he's pouring water into the hives. I don't know if, I would hope it was effective. He doesn't seem to have a lot of hive losses that he mentions about, but I don't know. So what I want to take away from it, that's hard to know. I would say I'm very interested in the plants that the Romans are planting for bee gardens. And I'm more interested in what they're feeding the bees. And I think they've developed a very keen sense of what they're liking because they're very close, living very closely with the bees in their villas and other places. So what they're paying attention to forage is what I'm really interested in. and sort of the plant side rather than the sort of management side. Management side, I think they do a lot of crazy stuff. Yeah. So
I have a few questions as well.
Sure.
What is the font that you are using in your presentation?
Do you like it? Or is this like you don't like it?
No, like recently I've been using for a few medieval fonts, and I'm curious what the name of this guy is.
It's called High Tower Text.
High Tower?
Yeah. I like it too. It's not as illegible as Garamond.
Mm-hmm.
And it's spaced out enough that you can see it, and it's very clear, but it has when you bold it, it comes up without being too chunky. When I'm not doing beekeeping, I'm doing Latin epigraphy, so Latin inscription. So I'm very interested in fonts, and that's a great question. I'm glad a very font-related questions. Very interested in that. Yeah.
Is this open source? Is it the web-based, or like you have it on Windows or Mac?
It should be on Windows or Mac. If not, you can probably find it on Google Fonts.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be on the new like Windows Word.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the illustrations, they were great. Like, are they open source? So you just borrow them, or did you like custom order them?
Which illustrations?
There was one with a village and how it was organized, like in divisions and so on.
Oh, do you mean the archaeological photo, like the aerial photo, or the?
No, I think it was one that was really just an illustration, but it was showing like.
So I just Googled Roman Villa Rustica. That's just I really like that illustration too. I think it's a good, it shows all of the divisions of the Roman villa with the different parts have different names. The Villa Urbana is where people live in the villa. The Villa Rustica is the
like a farm on the countryside,
but where also the agricultural stuff goes on. And then so yeah.
Do you remember if that image or they had like further explanations of what was there?
I'm sure they do, but I mean, if you just type in villa anatomy or anything, you'll find like dozens of descriptions of different villas. So it's not that will probably have it, but you'll find many different. There's many different excavated villas, especially rural villas, that will have that information as well. Not all of them will have apiaries.
Yeah.
Some, and not all of, even if they did, it's hard to identify them if we don't have the ceramic hives. So that characteristic feature of bees is, except in a few instances like that Segobriga apiary, hard to find with the wall that had the horizontal ceramic hive set into it.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to read from some of the chat. So somebody said, Michelle said, so fascinating. I love this presentation and would love to hear more. And Jana said, so interesting. Thank you. Michelle asked if there was any chance you would lead a historical beekeeping holiday in Iberia post-COVID.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah.
And then Paul and Mary said, thank you so much for the interesting work. It shows how timeless beekeeping is, and our colleagues through the millennia have struggled to understand bee health and our impacts upon them. So yeah, very, very, very fascinating. I think you didn't have to rush through. I think we would have been hungry for some more information from you. It's quite interesting work that you're doing.
I see. So yeah, the bird entrails, could it be worse than the organic acid which we instill in our hives? Yeah, so the Romans also had trouble with wax moths and a bunch of other things in Europe, and Columella mentions, I didn't want to go into integrated pest management, but there's that is a separate presentation for Roman beekeeping, but they have a number of similar methods that are still used, like entrance reducers. So Columella has a section on how you reduce the entrance to prevent geckos and other things like hive moths from getting in. So there's a lot of similarities, but the bird entrails I noted because it was so strange.
Do you think you would have enough material to do a presentation on just the management of the bees back then? Like from like splits or swarms, and then hiving them, and then managing pests and so on, and taking the honey and so.
Yeah, in fact, so I'm just going to share very briefly. So the final slide, I think it was, where was it? Okay, just let me find this. So he has a section on, I think it was here. Yeah, so can you all see this slide?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So in section 12, there's this disease, which is sort of, the word phagedina means gangrene, but it's basically the brood hasn't come to maturity. Young bees will die if they cease to be kept warm, for they often die of a distemper called phagedina. But whatever that is, apparently they get blown off course or something. For it's the habit of bees to construct beforehand many cells as they think they can fill before winter. It sometimes happens that when their wax instructions are not finished, the swarms, while they're roaming too far afield in search of honey, are overwhelmed in the woods by sudden showers and whirlwinds and lose most of the ordinary bees. When this has happened, the few remained are not enough to fill the combs, and the empty parts of the wax cells become rotten. And since diseases gradually creep in somehow, the honey becomes corrupted and the bees too themselves die. This is probably more of a queen problem and laying problem than the workers dying. He doesn't realize this, I think. But in order to help them, he performs a split. He says, to prevent this, either the populations of two hives ought to be united so that they can fill the waxen cells which are still sound, or if a second swarm is not available, we must remove the honeycombs from the uninhabited parts before they go rotten with a very sharp knife, for it's important that also that a very blunt iron tool, because it does not easily penetrate, should not be pressed with great force to dislodge the combs from their places. So yeah, that's just one section on splits. He talks about these in other places as well. Other authors talk about splits and how to, combine two colonies together. Strangely, the Romans didn't have the concept of a queen bee, only a king bee. So they don't think that the king is laying any eggs. They think that the whole reproductive system is very different. The queen bee was only found out in the sort of late medieval period. So yeah, their whole way of conceiving of the interior hive structure and what's happening inside is very different.
Rudimentary, right?
Yeah, because they're modeling the structure after human government that they think is happening. So the drones nobody likes. They think that they should be killed sometimes if they're not working because they don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand that the worker bees are female or how the eggs are made. They know that eggs are made and things are produced, but because they can't see inside the hive to see this stuff happening, they don't know. They sort of know that the king bees are important and that the kings will fight each other like human kings would in a military sort of system. It's very bizarre. But, in fitting with, sort of patriarchal structures in the past, it was a really world change, a sea change when we started to think about queen bees for how even monarchs are conceived. Like the Queen of England was frequently associated with queen bees as well, and that was about the time that queen bees were starting to be discovered. That they were the sort of center point of the hive. So
there's like from the text you can read that they knew that the drones don't produce.
Yeah, they thought that it was odd that they were kicked out every winter, and that they, they said, they're lazy workers, and they would compare them to other elements of society that they thought. So they were using the drones as, the baggage for a bunch of other societal things. But yeah, they thought it was odd. They observed that the drones' bodies were kicked out and that they must not be, pulling their weight or something. Yeah, so they could definitely see that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
No problem. So John Kaufman says the Roman manuals are available. Yeah, they are available. So there's 3 Roman manuals. I think the one that will be most readily accessible would be Varro's on agriculture. And I can put a link, I can send a link to Michelle or Lucy about that text, if you'd like. I have looked at beekeeping in ancient Egypt. We have depictions of these ceramic hives, these horizontal ceramic hives, but we don't have any physical remains of them from ancient Egypt. So it's true that the Egyptians were using these ceramic hives as well, again, coastal, by the way. Some authors think that the Romans and other populations in the ancient Mediterranean, such as the Carthaginians, took these ceramic hives from the Egyptians and spread them through sea sort of transport to other coastal areas. I don't know. I think that could be the case or not. It's such a connected area, the Mediterranean, that it's hard to know where anything begins or ends in terms of agriculture or sort of designs, just because it's such a connected area by sea. So no tomb models or honey in tombs. There are probably, I don't think there are tomb models, but we have certainly a number of sort of instruments connected with honey production. It seems like perhaps uncapping knives and things like that. We have smokers. I forgot to mention this. We have tons of smokers. These ceramic like boxes, sometimes they look like circles with a lot of holes in them. The smokers are not the puff smokers. That's a very new invention, but these sort of ceramic balls that have holes in them like a wiffle ball, and you'd burn plant material inside it. Sometimes they have a spout. We have these from the Minoan period, so 1500s, 1800s BCE. They're very useful because you can sort of do organic residue analysis to see which plants were being burned in them, which I think is really cool. Fumigation was a common Roman health treatment for these, to fumigate the hives. They thought it was very healthy for the bees, but they also used the smoke to make the bees docile. This is, pretty common, of course, that we use a smoker in the same way, but we have smokers from very early on. I didn't mention those because they didn't think they'd be super important. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more at the bottom there.
Oh, it did. Okay. No tomb models or honey in tombs, that one? Or?
Yeah. Sorry, did you just cover?
Yeah, so I would say no, there's no tomb models, but there are other things, just not the hives yet. But, we can find ceramic every day. It's just, the problem is some archaeologists will not know what they're finding is a ceramic hive, for instance. If they find a shard of a hive and it doesn't have the striations, it's just thrown away or miscatalogued. So, not all archaeologists will be able to recognize these things. And those ceramic tubes were only recognized as hives in the late 90s. They had been kicking around in museums, some parts of them, for many years. But, it's the archaeology of beekeeping is very recent. So now we know what to look for. And, that's a pretty big difference. Now we have identified these types of hives in many different places. Even Romania, there's in the edited volume that I have, there's some Roman Dalmatia. So there's some from Croatia and I believe Romania as well, these tube hives. But that's new, those are very recent. So we're expanding our sort of framework for where we think that these hives are found. Though they aren't the most representative of types of Roman beekeeping, because as that quote I showed you showed, the Romans didn't necessarily prefer ceramic.
Okay, are there any more questions or comments for David? No. Thank you very much. I think we'd be very interested in having you come back to talk about maybe the Roman integrated pest management, if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, I would. I feel like I've gotten a lot of sort of things covered in this one, so I can get very specific and go a bit slower on the integrated pest management, which I find very fascinating. And I could even go into different animals and compare them with the beekeeping of that one. So there's a lot you can do with these farming texts as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. Okay, so we're on to our December meeting. We are going to have Henry Dillon back with, he's going to do a game show with bee trivia. I know that we're trying to source out some prizes for this, so it should be a fun end of the year to these crazy Zoom meetings that we've been having to attend. Hopefully, Kathy, we're gonna have a chat with you about when we might be getting back to U of T to meet in person again. It'll be good to see everybody in the flesh. But please keep your book your calendar for the first Tuesday in December for hopefully what will be a very fun evening. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in December. Thank you. Okay, good night.
Nice.